offer group and tailor-made packages for all your requirements. Based on Romford Road in London, for our last 10 days Umrah package, please call us on 0208 478 8911.
Ramadan FM 2018.
The voice of British Muslims.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You are tuned into Ramadan FM 2018, the Students of Knowledge. My name is Munib and I'm a student in Al-Minaj Institute. Today I've been joined by Brother Multaza. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And Brother Rafiq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Brother Rafiq is a voluntary teacher at Al-Minaj Institute, at Minaj Quran, and also is a student at Al-Minaj Institute. Brother Multaza, where do you study?
St. Bonds.
Today we'll be discussing the topic of addiction. Without further ado, let's get straight into the show. So, Brother Multaza, what do you think addiction is? What is addiction?
Addiction is like when you start doing something and then you just can't stop.
Yeah.
Can there be a good addiction and a bad addiction, or are all addictions bad?
There can be good addictions and there can be bad addictions.
For example?
Like a bad addiction could be like smoking or doing drugs or stuff.
Brother Rafiq, what do you have to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Addiction would be, I would say, something which you, a habit or something which you do, which you can't control, and then it becomes, it negatively impacts on you. It's usually used in that kind of sense, I would say.
Does it always have to be negative, or can they be positive as well?
Yeah, I mean, what we would like to do is replace, it's usually used in a negative connotation. And what we would like to say is that instead of being addicted to such and such, which is negative, why don't you be addicted to, I don't know, serving humanity or worshipping God, or, you know. So in that sense, you could call that addiction. But usually I think it's used for in a negative way, addiction. Okay.
So that leads me on to my next question. Are all types of addictions haram or not allowed in Islam?
Well, if we take the usual use of the word, do you have anything? I want to listen to you.
You
Okay. Addictions are usually, as Brother Murtaza mentioned, you know, drugs, alcohol, smoking. Well, they're the usual kind of culprits. But also, I was having to think about this when you mentioned the topic. There's also addiction to shopping, addiction to social media, the internet. I mean, really, seriously, I mean, how many hours do people these days spend on their phones, on their on their mobiles, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and whatnot? Sometimes it can drain your whole life away. So I think that is also an addiction. I don't know if Murtaza wants to add.
No. That's pretty much said it all.
Yeah.
So there's some people in this world that are looking forward. So if, say for example, if they've read Zohar Namaz and then they're looking forward to reading the Asr Namaz, so would that also be an addiction? So they're addicted to God or addicted to Allah?
I'd say that's an obligation. We're required to perform prayers 5 times a day. We should actually look forward to the prayers. There should be a yearning in our hearts and our minds that it's going to be the time of Asr, or I'm going to join a Jamaat. And that is because our Salah is meant to be a time when we have the opportunity to communicate with our Lord and our Creator. So obviously we're not, we're ordinary people. We don't have that kind of frame of mind. But the ideal frame of mind is, as Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated, that you worship Allah as though you are seeing Him. And if you can't reach that state of mind and heart, then at least have the realization that He is watching you. He is seeing you.
But then there's some people who don't pray at all.
Absolutely, absolutely. They're neglectful. They haven't seen maybe the beauty of you can say the beauty of prayers. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stated, salah is the mi'rajul mu'min. The mi'raj is the night journey of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he went to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so for believer, his prayer, his namaz is the ascension, is the mi'raj of a believer. The namaz is the mi'raj of a believer. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to say, prayer, coolness fills my eyes in prayer.
Yeah. Brother Murtaza, have you got anything you want to say?
Yeah, like namaz is like 5 times a day. So sometimes when people finish one namaz, they start looking forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Because it's like when you're communicating with Allah.
Yeah.
So it's
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So which type of addictions would you say are against Islam?
Well, we mentioned drugs. I mean, go on, you start off.
Yeah, like alcohol is haram, and like drugs and smoking, they're not like a good thing to do. They're makruh, they're disliked in Islam.
Are all drugs makruh or are some haram?
I think some of them are haram as well.
Okay.
But so, tell me, can you, what do you mean by drugs now? Do we? Let's have a discussion on that.
There can be 2 types of drugs.
And there's no right or wrong on this,
yeah.
Because we need to have it's good to have a chat about it.
There can be 2 types of drugs. So one drug is medication, which is a completely different thing.
Okay.
So that's what benefits a person, or some people can't survive without it. And then there's another type of drug where you're talking about all this weed, cannabis, tobacco, which is, I'm not 100% sure. I think it's against Islam.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
yeah. And yourself, what would you say?
I would say, yeah, there's medication that some people have to have that. Like without it, they can't live.
Yeah.
And then there's the drugs that people just take for, like, they enjoy it or it makes them happy.
Yeah. So there's happy drugs, like.
I wouldn't necessarily describe it as happy. I would say they're addicted to it. So some people start off, so say for example you're stressed, and some people, it's their atmosphere, and then some people would have friends, when they go up to their friends and say that they're stressed, they will lead them on to say a cigarette, and slowly it will lead on to something which they would never imagine. But I think if you have the right friends, the right atmosphere, then it should help you. So say for example, if I had a friend and he was a 5 times namazi, he would put me on the right path. Whereas if I had a friend who was smoking cigarettes, gambling, doing drugs, drinking alcohol, then I would start slowly following his footsteps.
So company, I guess, is very important.
Yeah, and then
company.
I think parents also make a very big difference.
Yeah.
So it's the education that your parents give you. Whatever your parents say, that's why they say the upbringing has to be right until at least the age of, I'll say, 16 to 18, until you're baligh and you understand everything which is right and wrong.
Just in terms of drugs, I think usually when people refer to drugs negatively, it is referring to cannabis and crack and pot. I don't know what you call it. So I was walking down the street a couple of months ago, and someone asked me for a Rizla, and I said, "Who?"
Yeah.
And he went, "Have you got a Rizla?" And what did you call me? And then he just carried on walking away, and you could tell he looked a bit high on something. So I don't know what you call it, but those types of drugs, they're banned drugs, and they're people grow them illegally in their homes, or they import them illegally, or they somehow ship them to this country from places like Afghanistan. And there's a whole big, people describe it as a conspiracy, but it's not a conspiracy, it's actually true.
But Afghanistan is a Muslim country, so how
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay.
why would they be growing
Okay.
such a...
Yeah. Let me. I want to say a few things about that, but let me finish on
Okay.
the conspiracy part of it.
Okay.
The black community in America, in the United States, we know that they were literally shipped over to America to work on the fields during the slave trade. Millions of people, literally. You probably learnt about that in school. And what happened during that time? A lot of them died. A large percentage of them were Muslim because they were from West Africa. And have you heard of Malcolm X? Yeah, Malcolm X. That's why he called himself Malcolm X. He kept his surname as X because he didn't know what his surname was. He didn't. Usually, what the surname would be the name of their slave master. So, if someone's known as Ronald, then the slave would have Ronald as their surname. So he said, I'm a slave of Allah, right? And my origin is Western Africa, which is a Muslim area. So he kept his name as X. Now, during that time, there were a lot of black freedom movements. You could describe them as, and they wanted, there was a racist society. America was a racist society officially. Blacks were expected to sit on the backs of a bus, or they were expected to give up their seats for a white person.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, and that was, it was only 60 years ago. Right, and yes, America has made progress. The new world, the new free world. But the new free world just realized 60 years ago that these things were wrong. Islam didn't have this issue. 1400 years ago, our Prophet ﷺ, he stated that an Arab is not better than a non-Arab, and a non-Arab is not better than an Arab. So that's to digress slightly. But in order to break the black movement, the CIA, they decided to pump drugs into that community. And sounds crazy, but that's the facts, and there's films about it. It's known as a fact now. Yeah. But the drugs went out of control, and it didn't stay confined to the black community. It spread amongst the black community, but it also spread to the rest of lower class, middle class, upper class, white Americans became indulged in it as well. That's kind of like a brief history of drugs. Okay. But those drugs are addictive. Okay. And they cause hallucinations, they cause mental issues, they cause health issues. They're not prescribed to treat illnesses. They're not prescription drugs. They're not prescription drugs to treat illnesses or diseases. They are only there to, as you say, give someone a high, or they're referred to as happy drugs. But their effects are temporal. Sometimes their effects are harmful. But going into people who take the drugs and people who sell them, what they're doing is their actions lead to other issues and problems afterwards. Okay. So like what happens when if you can't afford the drugs, crime. Crime is attached to drug culture.
Well, some people do say that. So, say for example, cannabis. Some people say that cannabis can be a cure to cancer.
Yeah, it has been mentioned, but it's nothing kind of concrete. And whatever cannabis can do, prescribed drugs can also do. But in a few exceptional cases, I think they have allowed cannabis for a few individuals, if I remember correctly. But prescribed drugs, they're prescribed to treat illnesses. They are a treatment. So they're in a completely separate category. But saying that, some of them can also become addictive. Certain antidepressants, is being found that certain antidepressants can be addictive as well. So you start taking it, you suffer from depression, you start taking this medicine, and then what that does, that keeps you asleep. And when you're asleep, that makes you more depressed. So then you're addicted to the medicine again. You take the medicine again, and you get more depressed, and it's a vicious cycle, and it's hard to come out of it. So it is said, not all prescribed and pharmaceutical drugs are good for you as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, go on. Oh, you said something in the middle. I forgot what.
We're talking about Afghanistan being a Muslim country. And
go on. Yes. I mean, Afghanistan. It used to be, the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, cities like Herat. These were centers of learning at one time. Some of the greatest Muslim thought came from these areas. Obviously, the country is war ravaged. You had a dictator ruling over the country. Then the former USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, what Russia used to be, that invaded Afghanistan, and it was a failed invasion. They eventually left. They failed because America supported certain groups to fight the USSR. America and the USSR, there were two superpowers who were against each other. So the Americans, when the Americans invaded Vietnam, the Russians supported Vietnam rebels in Vietnam to defeat the America, to defeat the USA. So America thought, okay, we're going to do the same against the USSR in Afghanistan. So they supported these guys with the help of the Saudi Arabia, and they trained people, especially young people, only the art of fighting and killing and terrorism. And those groups who they trained, they were Al-Qaeda, they were the Taliban, and then what do Al-Qaeda and the Taliban do? What did they learn? They learned terrorism techniques from the Americans, and they learned a narrow understanding of Islam from one particular school, and even from that school, it was just related to killing and violence, and fight the people who are not Muslim, and so they produced this group, which it brought down the USSR. But then when the USSR left, they were left in Afghanistan, and they implemented their own, they made their own country, and they continued carrying out terrorist attacks. They funded their state by planting poppy seeds, by planting plants which produce drugs. That's their income. Some countries sell oil, some countries sell mobile phones. The Taliban, when they took over Afghanistan, they sold drugs. Right, so that, unfortunately, it's sad that a Muslim country is producing that, and now America's in there again. America is in there this time, and the Taliban are fighting the Americans this time. They're the people who made their organization. So yeah.
So then, what do you think that the actual problem is, or the caution is, for people to start all these addictions? So say, for example, drugs, alcohol, gambling.
I think a lot of the time it's the society that they live in. Okay. So like if you have friends that are doing drugs or smoking, sometimes they'll just tell you to do it once or twice, and then you think it's fine, nothing will happen. But then eventually you start getting addicted, and then you end up doing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Peer pressure.
Yeah, peer pressure.
Does everyone who takes up drugs or smoking do it because of peer pressure? I guess there's a lot of people probably do.
I wouldn't say so. It's not always peer pressure. If the person's strong on the inside or mentally strong, then no matter how much someone would force him, it won't make a difference to him. So you can't always blame it on your friends that they got you started into this, or the society, because nowadays if you see around the local area, there's always a group of people who are standing at the corner of your road or somewhere selling drugs. So it's not always the people around you. I'll say it's the person itself, so you yourself, that has to take their own responsibility, at least. So,
what if? Okay, so I guess a lack of role models for young people. If there are a lack of role models, then you know who are they going to be? Who are young people going to aspire to be like? Yeah.
I think I think they should be educated more. So from the mosque. So say for example, if you go to a mosque, then the mosque teachers should tell them what's right and wrong, and then as well as their parents. So if they have more education about it and know what's right and wrong for them, then still it's up to it still comes back to the main point that it's up to the person itself or themselves to do what they're gonna do, because no one's controlling their mindset now. Like, I can't tell you what to do unless you want to do it yourself, physically do it yourself. Or I can't tell Brother Murtaza what to do unless he wants to do it. So
A lot of the time people don't know what it's going to do to them because they're not really educated, because in mosques and schools, like you're talking about, they don't really talk about drugs and stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Do you think mosques should have?
Yeah, mosques should talk about it.
Have to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the consequences, you got, gang culture.
The main people, I think, is your parents. But then there's some parents who are 5-time namazis, they pray namaz, give zakat, do everything, and then their children are on the streets, part of gangs, involved in knife crimes. So it doesn't link in. So you can't always blame the parents on what's going on to the child, because the child could have been educated, but it depends on the child itself if he's going to listen.
Yeah. So I guess parents, that they've got a responsibility, but a lot of parents they're unaware of what goes on outside themselves. That there are groups of individuals who make money out of selling drugs, and they will approach children. They may have, I don't know if you've come across any people. You have?
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes? Yourself? Oh dear.
I think.
But how do you deal with that?
I either just sort of blank them, or I say no thank you, or just walk away sometimes.
And is this in public?
Yes, it's in public a lot of the time, but it's usually when I'm alone.
Yeah.
So when I'm not with someone or something, then they'll approach us.
Wow.
I'll say they normally target more weak people, because they know that they're gonna do it anyways, because it's their mentality. So the people that sell it, they know what type of person we can trap into all this. So they target the people, and then they educate the people. They'll tell them all the benefits about taking it, and then they'll sell it instead of telling them all the bad things as well. So it's better if the parents or the mosque teachers or the society tells them what's wrong, and then after it's up to the person, and see if the person actually makes a difference on the person.
So it's young people need to be educated on the consequences of drugs. That it's bad for your health, it's bad for your future, it's bad for your pockets because it costs money. And I guess that's how people get into gang culture and gang crime, because they need to fund their addiction of drugs, or they're competing with other drug dealers.
Yeah.
And even if they're not kind of involved in the gangs themselves, but they're taking drugs, they're going to encounter these people. And if they're shooting at each other, which is what's going on, these days, if they're shooting at each other, or knifing each other, then sometimes people will associate you with a particular individual if you're seen with them, so you could be targeted as well, and that could affect yourself, your family, could affect your life, cause all sorts of problems, and then you might be spending most of your time on that particular addiction instead of studying like you should be doing, and trying to make a life for yourself, so that you can do well in the future.
I was gonna say, so there's some people out there that have been educated, but they just don't want to listen. So what would you say to those people?
A lot of the time they're bribed into it. So like the people will say that you will get lots of money, and then they get so bribed into it.
Okay.
And then the people that do it after they've been taught, there's not much you can do about them.
I'd say never give up on anyone. Yes, obviously there's not much you can do sometimes with people.
Yeah.
But there's always a hope. If they're if they're really kind of deeply involved in this crime, in drug crime or in a particular addiction, there is support out there, official support from a government level. There's organisations that can be contacted.
Do you think the government support actually helps, or is it just a time pass?
Well, there are stop smoking organisations. There are organisations who try to help people who want to, because in this country you can drink alcohol. It's not seen as a problem.
Yeah.
But there is alcoholism, where you become an alcoholic, where you're drinking too much, and there are organisations to help you come out of being an alcoholic. So I'm not sure how successful they are, to be honest. Would have to see some statistics to see how many cases have been referred to them and how many have been successful.
Yeah. Who would you say is the main person into getting them into this addiction, or getting them started?
Yeah.
It's usually like the older people that get them into it. They get the young people to try and do the work for them.
What do you mean by older people?
So it's like people in like their 20s or their 30s trying to get teenagers that are still young who haven't learned anything about it.
So
I don't know the
do you
bad
mean
bits.
the society, or?
It's usually the society.
No, I think what you're saying is individuals, the drug dealers, because drug dealers, that's their job, to sell drugs. So if a drug dealer tried to sell it to someone who's in his 20s, he'll just say, just wait, I'll buy it from you, and then call 999 and get them arrested. But if a drug dealer approached a 12-year-old on the street, then and make a big thing out of it and say, look, this is what you want to try. This is, if you haven't tried drugs yet, you got to try them. I don't know what their script is. I don't know how they sell their drugs, but I guess that's kind of, they'll have a pitch to sell their drugs, and then they're basically taking money off children, to earn that's their earning. I think that'll be the earning. Yeah, they don't get a pension in it, and they don't get a lunch break, but that's what they're doing. That's their job.
So the money that they earn, according to Islam, would that be halal or haram? Well, it is an obvious question, but
yeah, it'll be haram. It'll be haram. And it's really sad if someone is doing that and then performing Hajj with it, or Umrah.
Yeah.
Or giving it to a mosque, or using it for if they got children, using it for their child's education. It makes you wonder, what kind of education will that child have? Will there be barakah in that child's education?
Okay.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. But there are, as I say, organisations out there. But I think mosques, my personal view is, mosques have to really take this on. It's a challenge for them. They need to go into the communities and vigorously approach people and say, look, if you know anyone who is dealing, or if you know anyone who is taking drugs, you want them out of it, we can help you, And I think Islam has so much it can offer to these people, and just on the reasons why people might take them, it just occurred to me, maybe someone's going through a bad patch in their life, and they might think drugs is a way out. It helps them, free their mind. I don't know, but I've never taken. I don't know what happens when you take it.
There's other alternatives to drugs. So if you are going through a bad phase in your mind, you could do more zikr of Allah, do more prayers, nafil.
Yeah.
There's reading the Quran.
Yeah.
Tasbih. So why would they have chosen drugs or alcohol to get rid of the tensions? Or
absolutely. Quran, not just drugs but alcohol abuse. It usually happens when people have gone through a bad patch, and I think, as Murtaza said, if people are made aware from a young age of the harm, how these things are actually harmful. Cigarettes used to cigarettes sponsor sporting events, but these days, it's ironic really, because you're selling something, and at the same time it's got a message on there saying smoking kills. Right. How ironic is that? But yeah, it's good that there's a health warning on there. But as you say, it's sometimes it may be that someone's going through a patch, and then they feel that this may be a way out of it. I would say Umrah trip does wonders. You can answer the call. You press the button, and if you put your headset on, you'll be able to hear the caller. Put your headset on.
Do you only press the button?
Yeah, press the button. And they hung up. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
I think they hung up. Which button did you press?
The one over there.
Red button, fader up.
This one, yeah?
Red button. Up to 20. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Oh,
where are you calling from?
My name is Shahid. I'm regular at Minhajul Quran. I'm just speaking. Is that Brother Rafiq?
It is. Brother Shahid.
How are
it's
you?
nice hearing your
Okay.
voice. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was really good listening to the program. It's quite an a few interesting subjects around young people, drugs, and knife crime and gun crime.
Absolutely.
It's quite an important subject. I don't know if you guys remember, just last week, Brother Ismail had Raheel, who was involved formerly in gangs, and he's got his own organisation called CRS, which he sort of tries to work with young people who have been part of gangs, and carried out some really quite nasty things as well. So he's been through the system and he knows what it's like, and he's playing an active part. But the good thing about that is that he's actually playing an active part working with Minhaj as well now.
Excellent. That is really good to hear.
You see, I think one of the things you talked about just a few minutes ago is actually there's a complete failure, and I think we have to realise this by mosques. Mosques live in a vacuum. They tend to live in a place where people and lives of people don't actually matter, because all they're really concerned or seem to be concerned about is just training a few people how to read the Holy Quran and just go out there and live in the world. Whereas they fail to actually recognize that the young people who are living in the real world out there are facing all these difficulties and these issues and day-to-day things, which most of our ulama, unfortunately, because of they're coming from Pakistan, they're very old, they can't actually associate with the young people, so they're in a different level. So we're finding that as a huge problem. Myself, working in this sector for over 20 years, we're finding this as a huge problem. So, I mean, my question to you guys would be: all right, we know that the mosque is failing. What positive things do you think the mosque can do?
Yeah,
it's a good question.
I think that the work that you're proposing I think that's basically what we need to do. We need to get people like you mentioned Raheel, and
correct, yes.
Yeah, and I think that people like that, if they come in, they can give everyone a reality check and say that, look, it's not about flashy cars and guns and looking the piece. It's, you know, once you start going down that line, you're entering a really nasty world out there, and your life will end up getting messed up unless you come back from it. I think that's a really important message, and I think it's brilliant that. You know, you've brought people like Raheel in, and Brother Ismail has had him on his show. I mean that is, and I think it'd be good if other mosques also, like Minhaj al-Quran are doing, if other mosques also worked with individuals like that.
Absolutely. Not to say that we're doing, fantastically. There's a long way to go, but at least we started that conversation, which is really important.
Yeah. I know, Brother Shahid, is your aspirations are, we need to be up there, which is great. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
Really
but the other thing is, obviously, I think, you know what it is? You've got two fantastic young persons with you. But normally, if you ask even these people, what will happen is, do they really talk about subjects that's close to their hearts or what's affecting them? Say, for example, one of these two guys were actually involved in a gang. Would they really come to a mosque and ask someone in a mosque, what to do? The probably answer is, you can ask them, but I think the answer is going to be no.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably will be.
Unless you've got some confidence, but yeah.
I guess the mosque needs to be marketed better. It needs to be made more accessible, warmer. There needs to be a privacy area where you can access different services, or just a notice board or somewhere where, without making it obvious, if someone is involved in this and they need help, and so they can walk past and they can kind of glance at a number on the wall and get help.
They should be able. That they should be able to talk to any people in the mosque. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Now the thing is, what you've really got is, if you think about it, and let us go back to 1400 years, and we've got the Prophet's mosque in Medina. And people were not afraid to come and ask and deal with their issues at that particular mosque.
Yeah.
That's the role model of a mosque. That even a young person, even if they were a child and they had lost their parents, they would come to the Prophet and say, "Oh, I've got this particular problem." Even a woman could come into the mosque and ask, and she could get her issues dealt with. The problem with mosques now at the moment is that most young people can't talk. Most women, particularly if they're going through an issue, there's no way they would actually mention it in a mosque. So the mosques have to change.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Minhaj al-Quran is changing and it's leading the light. But it's really important that we start dealing with these issues, because if we don't, then we're looking at a really, really black hole.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think the first step would actually be to the mosques changing?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first step is that you have to admit when you're wrong.
Okay.
So it's like someone saying, if Brother Rafiq said a few minutes ago, how do you deal with someone who's got a drug issue? First of all, you sit them down and actually work with them and actually get them to admit that they want some to change it. So admittance is first, and then you actually start looking at organizations outside who can actually provide you the support. If you think that we as people within the mosque or the ulama can actually deal with this problem, we can't. But we can, together with other organizations, people like Raheel, other organizations, people who are specialists in this subject, so that we can sit down and basically say, look, let's deal with this. Let's see what we can do to move our young people on. I'll give you a good example. Yesterday on the show, I was interviewing some people, and we had the NCS, which is the National Citizenship Service, where they take young people away from their everyday mundane lives, and you go and enjoy yourself for 4 weeks. You become leaders. And that's one of the ways to actually deal with this, to actually give people opportunities, a chance, a hope. I'll just finish with one thing, because if you ever, I've worked with drug dealers and young people who become into drugs. Now, if you're saying to a young person that has an opportunity to earn £6.75 in JD Sport, or you can earn £500 an hour just going and delivering something, what choice does that leave for the young person? What choice would you take?
Yeah. That's powerful.
I think money is a really powerful thing.
I'm going to leave you with that, but I thank you guys very much. And it's a very, very interesting program.
Thank you for calling, Brother Shahid. Appreciate that.
You're very welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Just to let you know, Brother Shahid he works at Minhaj al-Quran, and he's a community liaison officer, and he deals with services. He deals with a whole spectrum of different services in Minhaj al-Quran. Very talented and experienced individual who and great visionary as well. Talking about young people, just to make mention it, he was the first. When Minhaj al-Quran was opened in this country, the founder, Shaykh al-Islam, Dr. Muhammad Tahir al-Qadiri, he realized that there needs to be a platform for young people, and he established in those days what was known as the Muslim Youth League. And Brother Shahid, this is going back over 20 years ago, and Brother Shahid was the first, you can say, head of that Muslim Youth League organization. So I think we're really grateful that he rang in. I just want to, moving on slightly, there's often a question about the use of, I think we were speaking about it yesterday, use of alcohol in medicine.
Oh yeah, it was on Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday. So have you got anything to say about that?
No, I haven't heard about that.
I still remember what you said. You said it's denatured.
Denatured, yeah. So basically, when alcohol itself is not medicine, right? So I know in this country they sometimes say, a glass of wine is actually good for you. There's a debate in the science community. Sometimes they say a glass of wine is actually worse than drinking lots and lots of wine. So it's a debate in the science community. According to Islamic tradition, the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stated that the wine is not the treatment, but it's the disease itself. It's the illness itself. And in another hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stated that when Allah he made khamar, alcohol or wine, prohibited. He took away the beneficial properties of it. Yeah. So when it's used in medicine, if it is used, it's not used for its healing properties, but it's used as a preservative, or it's used as to help in the mixture. But it doesn't remain as alcohol.
Okay.
Because when it's fermented, it's like, for example, vinegar. Vinegar can be made from alcohol. So vinegar is, so you ferment, I don't know, have you done fermentation in school?
No.
Fermenting? No? So you heat something up, you heat a product or a chemical. Yeah. And it changes its form. It becomes a different chemical.
Yeah.
So when you do that when you ferment alcohol, it produces vinegar. And vinegar is halal. Right? Vinegar is because it doesn't have the intoxicating effects of alcohol.
I want to mention a teaching of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that if you drink wine, after you drink the wine, the next 40 days your ibadah is rejected. Now, following that teaching, so if, say for example, someone drank wine before the month of Ramadan, 2 days before the month of Ramadan, does his ibadah, so is there any point of him fasting during Ramadan and doing ibadah, or is there no point of him doing it because his ibadah is going to be rejected anyways? Brother Musa, what do you have to say about that?
I would say that not really sure, really.
Or the listeners? I think this, yeah. John.
Okay, so we did go through this on Saturday in class, and the teaching doesn't have a literal meaning. It's just there so people don't do the action in the first place. So there's no point of actually doing the action and then feeling bad and doing tawbah after it. You shouldn't do the action anyways in the beginning. Did you have something to say?
It's to emphasize the severity of drinking alcohol, and how how disliked it is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as I say, when it's used in medicine, it's fermented. It's no longer, it doesn't keep its intoxicating qualities. It's no longer an intoxicant. And intoxicants are what causes addictions. So you have, for example, smoking is in many ways an intoxicant. It addicts. You're addicted to the nicotine in there. But yeah, I think you just have to look outside when we come for Tarawih, and you see people literally drunk so badly they're walking in the middle of the road.
Yeah, they can hardly stand up.
And I think our masajid, that's also a challenge for us as well, and a lot of Muslims are involved in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Muslims. It's mostly the youth that's nowadays involved in all these drinking, gambling,
that's a big addiction.
What would you class cigarettes as? So is that haram or
Sheikh Mufti Murtaza?
I think I've been taught that it's makruh, that it's disliked, but it's not totally haram.
I mean, in the 1960s, when it was fashionable, when the cigarettes were advertised, everyone was advertising cigarettes. 50s and 60s, everyone was promoting them. But the centers of Islamic learning, such as Al-Azhar Sharif in Egypt, they withheld from giving a verdict. They said, we don't know enough about this. It might be nice now. What about in 10 years' time? What's it doing to your body? So it was only later on when we found out that there are about 4,000 different chemicals in cigarettes. You got nicotine, you got tar, you got all these different chemicals which are destroying your lungs and damaging your heart and your blood and your respiratory system, and it's causing all sorts of nasty things to go on inside your body. And then there was a conference about 20 years ago in Jeddah, where all of the scholars, Muslim scholars, they said it was makruh, but from among them, many said it was haram. From among them, many also said it was haram, because in the Quran it says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim," that do not kill anfusakum, do not kill yourself. Do not kill yourself. There's a command in the Quran. So by indulging in cigarettes, you are harming your own body. And if you're a male, you might not be able to have children if you have too many cigarettes. That's something to put people off. So yeah, that is also
there's one more point, and then I'd like to finish. So, what would you think the actual solution is to all of these addictions? How could you stop them from even starting off with these addictions before they actually start off?
Go on. I could talk and talk. You want to say anything? No? Okay. Psychological research states that if you can avoid something for 21 days, you can probably drop that as a habit. But then you've got to replace it with something. Your nafs is always kind of, having desire for that. In that sense, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and it states that whoever wholly dedicates to Allah 40 days, wisdom will appear on his heart and tongue. Right, so there's a hadith narrated in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba, the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, and Imam Abu Nuaym narrates it in his Hilyatul Awliya and many others. So I don't know if that's a one counter, but as you say, I think, as Murtaza said, and yourself, education. The harmful effects of smoking, drugs, and other types of addictions, and the alternative. Give young people the alternative so they don't take that route in the first place. And I think stability in the home, you mentioned parent stability, is essential for children to do well, for young people to do well.
Okay. I think that's it. I'd like to finish off. Thank you for tuning in to Ramadan FM 2018, and remember to tune in to Al-Minhaj Institute every Monday to Thursday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.